Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this site event on multi-level action delivers, elevating climate action of the urban world into the emergency mode. I've just been informed that we're also now live for a virtual audience, so thank you also very much for joining us both in person here at the World Conference Center in Bonn, but also online. This event is convened by ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, in its capacity as the focal point of the local governments and municipal authorities constituency. The Local Governments and Municipal Authorities Constituency, in short LGMA, is the official engagement mechanism of local and regional governments into the UNFCCC process. It consists of more than 30 local and regional government networks that are accredited to the UNFCCC. ICLEI itself is a network of 2,500 cities and regions in more than 125 countries committed to sustainable urban development and, as I mentioned, acts as the focal point of the LGMA. My name is Leon Diaz-Bohne. I'm the chief of the Secretariat General's office at ICLEI, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel with a number of representatives that embody this spirit of multi-level action. And we'll hear, I'm just going to go in the order of speakers, so we'll hear from Mr. Stefan Wagner, who's the head of the Department of International Affairs and Global Sustainability of the City of Bonn. We'll have Ms. Marijke van Staden, Director of ICLEI's Carbon Center for Local Climate Action and Reporting. We'll have Dr. Bernd Markus Liss, who is the head of section for climate change and climate policy at the German Development Corporation GIZ. And we will have Karis Hoffmann, who is a team member of the Circular Development Team at the ICLEI World Secretariat here in Bonn. And also hopefully later in the session, we will be joined by my other colleague, Mr. Yunus Arikan, who is the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLEI and focal point of the LGMA. He is currently speaking in another session. I'm sure you're all familiar with this dynamic environment, so we'll hope that he'll make it in time to join us for his intervention. So, quickly, so why is multi-level action relevant and how is it kind of enshrined into this UNFCCC process? Already the Paris Agreement recognized the importance of engagement of all levels of government, but we are particularly pleased that the Glasgow Climate Pact from last year is highlighting an urgent need for multi-level and cooperative action. Already in the run-up to Glasgow, we were very excited to see that more than 60 parties have managed to raise their NDCs by incorporating multi-level action component into their NDC, and half of these are from the Global South. So it's not particular to any world region. And of course, with this ask from the Glasgow Climate Pact for all nations to revise the NDCs by the end of the year, we hope that even more parties will actually include their own subnational governments into this revision process. On top of that, of course, we have initiatives such as the Race to Zero, where more than 1,000 cities globally have committed to climate neutrality by 2050, with ambitious targets already by 2030. And all of these activities and outcomes of multi-level action in the Glasgow Climate Pact that were also supported by the multi-level action pavilion that we convened at COP26 in the Blue Zone with a wide array of partners, and that was really the home of multi-level action in Glasgow, and we hope, of course, to replicate that also in Sharm el-Sheikh. But to start us off, maybe we'll commence with a city on the local level. So we have our wonderful host here, and I hope you've all enjoyed your stay so far here in Bonn. But of course, Bonn itself as a local government is also on a journey towards climate neutrality. And we have Mr. Wagner here from the Department of International Affairs and Global Sustainability, who, we're very keen to hear from Stefan about this trajectory towards climate neutrality and where Bonn stands on this journey. So, Mr. Wagner, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Leon. Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity to speak to you today on this distinguished panel. As I was said, I'm the head of International Affairs, Global Sustainability at the City of Bonn. I'm not myself a climate expert, I have to say, but of course we are in close relations with our colleagues, and I would like to give you a brief wrap up on what the City of Bonn is doing in terms of climate activity, climate mitigation, adaptation from the past until now. Let me maybe start with a look back. The city of Bonn itself has committed to climate protection already since the 1990s. At that time, important steps included, for example, an energy and climate protection scheme that was implemented at that time, as well as a detailed CO2 accounting that we started in the 1990s to go on until now. And also at that time, we thought at least we would have comprehensive active action plans on climate mitigation. Time went forward and things changed in the beginning of this decade. The question of resilience came up, of course, because we well understood that climate mitigation is the one side of the medal, but climate adaptation is the other. And of course, also in our area in Europe and here in Germany, you can officially see the outcomes of the climate change as we see it. So the impacts on climate change are very visible also on local level. We experience heat waves, even here in Germany. We experience heavy rainfalls, floodings. For those who are a bit familiar with the region, you may have heard about the Aare Valley flooding last year, where that really caused huge damage to the local population there. So the adaptation part of the climate issue went up very heavily at the beginning of this decade. This was also the time when we started, by the way, the Resilient Cities Conference together with ICLEI that ran for a couple of years here in Bonn, and maybe some of you have been attending at that time. Then in 2019, so not that long ago, in fact, the City Council, under the impression of this really dramatic climate change as we experience all over the world, and also under the impression of the Mighty Fridays for Future movement that is very prominent here in Europe, with young people walking the streets to fight for climate change and for generation solidarity. Under this impression, the city declared as one of the first cities in Germany climate emergency in July 2019. The mayor at that time said, if we want to prevent the worst consequences, of course we need to act now. It was very much also a symbol that the city put climate protection, climate adaptation very high on its political agenda at that time. And it was also meant as a declaration, as a signal to the national and even the international levels that we need to do something, and that local level engagement is important, and local level has to be taken into consideration and supported in their work towards climate change. It was also at that time that the City Council then decided by the end of 2019 that the city of Bonn should become climate neutral by 2035. This is, I have to admit, a very ambitious goal, not only for Bonn, but I think for any German city. The national goal is to become climate neutral by 2045, so 10 years later. So you can see, I think this is also the case in many countries around the world, that cities, at local level is even more ambition than often national or international declarations in terms of how to act with climate change. So this is high ambition, and it means also a strong, profound transformation of the whole city and the society to get this goal, to reach this goal in the end. If we want to make this a success, this was also the vision of the mayor, then we need to have all citizens on board. So you cannot do it only, let's say, technically from those who are involved on climate matters in Bonn, but you have to have a broad public movement that supports the idea of this climate neutrality. So this was why at that time the city of Bonn, together with an NGO, which is called Bonn im Wandel, or Transition Town Bonn, as an appropriate translation maybe, they started a public participatory process, which is called Bonn for Future, We for Climate. This is a society-driven, a cooperative, and also a quite innovative public participation process that didn't exist in this quality and in this, let's say, outreach so far here in the city. The idea of this process, of this participation process, is to develop a vision of the future. So what should the city of Bonn look like in 2035? What do citizens want see their city in the future? What are their priorities? And also what could they maybe contribute to get to this goal? The new thing about the process maybe was that it is not only a public participation process, but it goes beyond these traditional processes. We choose 100 randomly selected citizens, so from all the city society. They were addressed, they received an invitation letter by the city to join this process. So 100 citizens from all, let's say, areas of society, all income groups, all professions, were reached out to join this group. And there were also a number of experts that were also took into this process from various fields of society, including businesses, including NGOs, academia, culture, etc., public administration, of course, to work together. The process is structured in such a way that it is basically meant of 4 climate action events. The first Climate Action Day, which was the kickoff for the whole process, was in July last year, followed by a number of climate forums, where then those citizens and the experts discussed on specific issues of climate mitigation and adaptation. So only recently, the 2 forums took place on mobility and housing. This was, I think, the previous weekend, and now by the end of this month, the results of this participation process shall be presented to the city administration, and then in the next step also to the city council, the political decision-making body of the city of Bonn. In parallel to this process, which I once again think is a really good one because it really reaches out to local citizens, we also restructured our management of city administration here, of climate administration, city of Bonn. So the mayor, who is in office now since 2020, from the Green Party, she put the climate issue on the very top of her agenda, and she also took the climate responsibility for climate mitigation and into her own portfolio. So there were a few changes in the administration to make this process more cross-cutting in the administration, to make it more relevant, to make it more political powerful. And now the city is working on a climate plan together with experts from outside and support to really come up with a plan, a specific action plan on how to reach climate neutrality by 2035 in the end. So this is a process that is currently in the making. It is closely linked with the Bonn for Future participatory process to come up with a city strategic plan and at the same time take into consideration the wishes and expectations of our local citizenship. So to say, we are in the making. There's nothing we can present yet, unfortunately, so it is still in the making. There is a long way to go, and it's definitely a heavy challenge for the city. Key areas do involve, of course, the mobilization, the mobility area here in Bonn, the mobility sector, but also, of course, energy provision, housing, all these kinds of things, social issues, affordable housing, all these kind of things. We hope to present maybe some results of the process next time we meet here in Bonn, hopefully. And there's also another event I would like to refer to, which is the Daring Cities Conference that that's in the follow-up of Resilient Cities. We started Daring Cities together with ICLEI. So this is a conference on cities that really tackle climate change, that really have a strong commitment towards these climate issues. And they met in Bonn virtually the last 2 years, and we are planning to have another event this year in October, and I would very much like to invite you, either in person or also virtually, to join this movement of bold city leaders, but also of representatives from the city societies around the world. So this is for a short introduction from my part. Happy to answer questions, and back to you, Leon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stefan. And yeah, I think while we're still waiting, of course, for the climate action plan, I think Bonn is a great model also for other cities to follow when it comes to the process and also the governance of designing your trajectory towards climate neutrality. So thank you very much. And also just to refer to the Daring Cities conference, indeed, as Stefan mentioned, this is something that's hosted by the city of Bonn and by ICLEI. And yeah, I think last year we had 4,000 registrations online, and also representatives of 800 cities in 130 countries that joined us on this virtual platform, exchanging on solutions and mechanisms to address the climate emergency on the local level predominantly, but we also had representatives from other levels of governments in this spirit of multi-level governance. And this year, as you can see, you can sign up to be part of it again. It's free of charge, and most sessions will be offered virtually. And we will have a special theme on financing the climate emergency in this year's session. And most importantly, the outcomes of daring cities will feed into the activities of the LGMA at COP27 also. With that, we're going to move to our next speaker, which is Dr. Bernd Markus Liss from GIZ. I think most of you are familiar with GIZ, the German Development Corporation. They assist a lot of ministries, especially in Germany, but also working with other national governments worldwide on a plethora of topics. Dr. Liss is the head of section on climate change and climate policy. So in his capacity he can only comment as an observer, because GIZ is an observer to the UNFCCC process. But of course, GIZ has plenty of insights both into the new German government, whole of government approach to climate change, but also the German G7 presidency and how they engage with cities. So Dr. Liss, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks again to ICLEI for inviting me to this panel. We have a long-standing cooperation with ICLEI from the side of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ, and also from GIZ side, so it's my real pleasure to be here. I'd like to give you a brief overview of what the German G7 presidency is doing on cities, and also some insights on initiatives with that regard, and some experience that we have from our GIZ support to these initiatives. You're probably aware that cities contribute significantly to climate change. Urban areas account for more than 70% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, and with more than 80% of the gross domestic product being produced in cities, of course, they are also a powerhouse of economic development. So you could imagine climate change. On the one hand, cities are one of the causes, but on the other hand, they are also quite affected. And this means that institutions, people, assets that are concentrated in cities are quite vulnerable to the effects of climate change, including flood risks, heat stresses, and so on. 70% of the cities worldwide are already experiencing or are at risk to the impacts of climate change, most of them located in Asia and Africa. I've been living myself in Asia for quite some time. I was based in the Philippines, in Manila for 7 years. So you could imagine I've experienced heat waves, floods, typhoons. I experienced also in 2013 when the super typhoon Haiyan really went over to the Philippines. It was locally called Yolanda. The name sounds quite nice, but it had devastating impacts. The whole city of Tacloban was devastated, was destroyed. Many people lost their lives. We as GIZ, we had a project base there. Project office was destroyed. So we had quite some work to do to rescue, and this meant also government offices that were all affected, they needed to be rebuilt and the critical infrastructure to be put in place again to help people to provide the services. So I have really some hands-on experience with that, and therefore also, of course, it's very important from my side also to put cities in the focus of the attention with regard to climate change. This is also why the BMZ, in its core strategy, Climate and Energy and Just Transition, that was launched in 2021, includes sustainable, climate resilient, and real adaptive urban development, and highlighting cities' role in the social, ecological, and economically arranged just transition process. This requires multi-level action. This requires also a whole-of-government approach. It was mentioned that I could give you some insights on our new government. Of course, everybody knows that probably from the news that we had a change of government last November. Now the government is in place. We have a new approach. I have to say it's also a very innovative approach, a whole-of-government approach where 4 ministries are now directly in charge of climate change. Others are associated. The ones directly in climate change, you probably noticed, is the foreign affairs with a foreign climate policy.
Aber nur zu hören. Ja.
Yes, with a foreign climate policy approach that encompasses all the actors from the German government side. On the other hand, we have...
Yeah.
Okay, is it mute now? Okay. No matter. So, Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Economy and Climate Change, now economics, economic development, energy, renewable energy development and climate change within one ministry. That's also a novelty, so gives climate a voice in a ministry that usually deals with the private sector, with business development, economic activities, of course energy security, but also has now a focus on how Germany at the national level really positions itself with regard to climate change and achieves the climate change objectives up to 2030. So BMZ, of course, focusing on economic cooperation and development, the international perspective, put that all in the strategy, and we now see that this has also an impact on the inputs that Germany provides with this whole-of-government approach to the G7. Let me have a look into the G7 process. Germany, with its presidency, is really addressing the importance of cities, and it also recognizes that their transformative power is really in the focus. This was not in the previous presidencies of G7. So for the first time, the G7 has made sustainable urban development as a part of their agenda and their consultations. Specifically, it is recognized that the local level has quite some relevance in overcoming global challenges such as climate protection or combating pandemics. This is the other elephant in the room, so we also know that cities have a very important role in that, and also the economic impacts of such a crisis is quite obvious. The German G7 presidency program emphasizes that promoting good governance at local levels creates the preconditions for a successful approach to global challenges. Germany really wants to use its G7 presidency to shape the urban lives of citizens within the G7 and beyond in a sustainable manner, and it intends to launch international alliances to this end. Let me quote a little bit from the communique of the recent meeting of the G7 development ministers, which includes quite some reference on sustainable and climate-resilient infrastructure in cities. So the communique writes, as decided in 2021, we will implement the G7P through country-led partnership for infrastructure investment based on individual countries' sustainable infrastructure priorities and needs, in particular in Africa and the Indo-Pacific region, just energy transition partnerships, famous JETPs, you may remember South Africa is one of the first, where multi-level, multi-donor activities are shaped, are one of the G7 approaches to country partnerships that we are already starting to deliver. G7 is aiming to begin identifying further country-led partnerships by the end of 2022, open to all areas of infrastructure, including health and climate-related infrastructure. And further, it says the G7 recognized the importance of cities in developing and financing sustainable infrastructure, as well as municipal, local, and regional governments' processes for the transformative shift. Collaboration amongst them, and the significant role of central governments in supporting their initiatives. Therefore, the G7 expresses this by supporting effective multi-level governance, international knowledge sharing, and stronger financial and planning capacities at the local level. It was highlighted that substantial infrastructure investment needs to be done, and it was also made reference to existing programs, for example, the C40's Cities Finance Facility, which I will quote later on. So let's look a little bit into the G7 Urban Development Tract. Through the German G7 presidency, it's the first time that a G7 Urban Development Minister meetings. I've talked about the development ministers, but now the urban development ministers will have a meeting. This meeting is organized by our German Federal Ministry for Housing, Urban Development and Building, and it will take place in September. So right up in the run-up to COP. The communique that will emerge from this meeting will certainly be an important milestone for the engagement of cities and municipalities in the G7 process. The goal of the G7 Urban Development Track is to include sustainable urban development in their area, in their agenda, developing a common position on good urban development policy and cooperate more closely on sustainable urban development within the G7 in future. This will include involving local representatives and examining the possibility of joint alliances, initiatives in this policy area. We all know that C40, that the alliances of cities, also what ICLEI is doing, is a very important vehicle because policy instruments, policy statements are the one side, but the implementation actually is the other side, and this has to be localized. So as you can see, the G7 is proactively involving municipalities and their networks. And we also see that there is an important mentioning of the Urban 7 Group Alliance, in short U7, an alliance where the German Association of Cities, the Global Parliament of Mayors and ICLEI have joined forces and accompany the German G7 presidency, actively committing to an ongoing dialogue between G7 states and local stakeholders. This shows that cities and municipalities are ready to make their contribution to tackle global challenges. However, full potential can only be realized if they are structured, if there is a structured involvement of cities as partners. So with the project that GSZ is supporting, Cities for the Common Good, we are supporting the Ministry for Housing, Urban Development and Building with stakeholder participation processes in the G7 Urban Development Track. And in addition, we support internationalizing the National Urban Development Policy and the new Leipzig Charter. Let me again refer to one important ingredient. It was called infrastructure investment. So it's all about finance. It's in the end not all about finance availability, but also how finance is being implemented. And therefore, if we have to look into future infrastructure investment for sustainable development of cities, this is, by the way, also a strategic theme with this partnership of the G7 presidency. We see that we are following up the UK presidency, and Germany is now really developing partnerships further with various ministries and especially with the BMZ as a lead ministry in these tasks. Cities and urban areas play a critical role for infrastructure development. About 70% of all infrastructure investment is in urban areas. So you can imagine that the investment need is enormous. About 4.5 to 5.4 trillion in urban infrastructure is needed annually. A major challenge in closing the financing gap is the lack of bankable infrastructure projects. In addition, of course, COVID affected this and affected municipal budgets, so the room to maneuver has been limited. This is why project preparation facilities are so important, and this is also where we as GSZ, as supporter and implementer, come in on behalf of our commissioning parties, on behalf of the German government. We can support cities in preparing bankable projects with other actors, of course, with high sustainability standards and linking them to following up financing. I've mentioned the C40 Climate Finance Facility as an example for a project preparation facility where we are involved and which we implement jointly with the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. There's also the City Climate Finance Gap Fund as another example where we engage with World Bank, the European Investment Bank, and also together with our ministries, BMZ and BM for economics and climate. Transport is another area where with TUMI, the Transport and Urban Development Initiative, we provide an important contribution worldwide to sustainable transport systems, also a very big ingredient in the whole cities. So let me close again in highlighting that this is a big task requiring cooperation at all levels and also some hands-on support. We very much welcome that the G7 presidency has now picked up this topic, and we are looking forward to support and now also for your questions and the further discussion here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liss, for this very rich insight into the German policy, but also how Germany is then supporting and collaborating with other nations in implementing action on the ground. You already alluded to the G7 process, of course. We're very excited to see all those references to other levels of government and really look forward to the outcomes of the ministerial meeting on sustainable urbanization, and also maybe have some hopes that maybe even at the heads of state meeting that there could be some references to the work of cities as a consequence. But you also alluded to this urban engagement group that is being launched. It's not formalized yet, but we're working to have it formalized in the next G7 presidency. But we did convene the Urban 7 Summit in May with representatives of all the national city networks of all the G7 countries and some guests from the Global South. And we're going to play a short video for you now that summarizes this summit.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and a very warm welcome to the U7 Virtual Urban Summit.
We come together with the members of the City Association of the G7 states, the European Union and other international networks. But we all have come together that we are prepared to get our voice in this process, that we are able to create the global development. Without cities, it will be not possible that we can get a peaceful world.
To this end, the U7 group calls on G7 members and all G7 engagement groups to recognize the U7 as an official engagement group. With this declaration, we commit to engaging actively in the G7 process.
Our ministry, the BMZ, supports very much the involvement of cities and mayors into the overall G7 agenda.
Today's meeting is an important step in giving the municipal level a stronger voice in a multilateral cooperation.
We recognise this collaboration as absolutely essential to raising the voices of cities on the key global challenges that will impact not just on our cities, but on the whole world.
The U7 group, in fact, does the same thing only on a different level. Here it's a question of convincing 7 states, including those whose actions are most likely to change the course of the world and the climate, that the local municipal governments are able to provide them with strategic assistance to achieve the goals that the necessary environmental and social transition and respect for human rights require everywhere in the world.
The declaration puts strong emphasis on the need to engage local governments in global diplomacy and development cooperation efforts in G7 countries.
The review of the new urban agenda has made it clear that the challenges that we face are too complex and too intertwined to solve by one sphere of government alone.
All of our activities are overshadowed by the war in Ukraine. But this only makes the achievement of our goals and the change of governance more urgent. The Ukrainian democracy was built in cities, and this is a war being fought in and against cities: Kyiv, Mariupol, Kharkiv. And so, as cities, we must respond together. The urgency of the situation makes our cooperation even more critical.
Right, thank you very much. with that, I think we can proceed. So we've heard now a lot about the German perspective, both on the local level and also on the national level. And by the way, I know Mr. Wagner needs to leave us during the session, so if he walks out in a little bit, don't be surprised. But thank you very much for having been here. And I know we have your colleague, Ms. Norden, here from the city of Bonn, who will also be able to maybe answer some of the questions in case they arise. And also on that note, if you have questions, if you're following the session virtually, I think you can submit your questions through the event platform. And otherwise, we will try to have a short round of questions also in the room here. But yeah, now, so we've heard about the German context, and it has set some great example, I think, for multi-level action. But of course, we're here in Germany, but we are representing all the countries. So we also need multi-level action everywhere around the world. And for that, ICLEI is one of the networks supporting these efforts. And we have here Ms. Mareike von Staden, the director of the Carbon Center for Local Climate Action and Reporting. And she'll now enlighten us a little bit more about how ICLEI is also supporting cities and national governments around the world in their multi-level action efforts. Mareike, please, you have the floor, and I will pull up your slides immediately. So
wonderful. Thank you very much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Apologies, my voice is a bit scratchy. I've been talking too much, clearly. We are at an important time in this whole climate negotiation space, but we are also in a scary time when we see the impacts of climate. And I think we're now in a situation where everybody knows we need to scale up, we need to accelerate, we need to take responsibility and move forward. If I could maybe get the mouse, then I can, there we can move forward. Wonderful. And I think it's important to understand that we are in this boat together. I think you all might have seen this picture. We are in this boat together, one planet Earth. There is only one planet Earth and there is no plan B. So we need to be part of plan A. And we've heard of the city of Bonn upscaling its climate action plan. We heard about the G7, which is super exciting news. And I would like to zoom in on ICLEI's approach and the support package that we can offer. And I'm super happy to be here with my colleague Charis, who would also zoom in on circular development. But I'll give you the framing of our support package. So now it's, there we go, thanks. So our Green Climate Cities program is ICLEI's global climate impact program. It's open, it's free for any local and or regional government to join and to benefit from what we can offer in terms of global services. Now, this brings together the climate support that we can give, and we call on all subnational governments in all parts of the world to set a climate neutrality target. And I'll show you why climate neutrality is not just talking about climate change mitigation. We call on setting these targets before 2050, because 2050 is, if we're looking at the latest climate science, too late. So step it up, and I really love the case of Bonn, the case of Utrecht, and several other cities around the world that have set these targets and pushed them earlier than 2050. We need to see more of that daring leadership, and that's also what we will be discussing in these different events of ours. The access that we can give to subnational governments is, back to the previous slide, please. The access that we can give is a host of technical assistance, policy guidance, and tools, but of course, linking to enablers. We want to enable our local and regional governments to be able to act. And of course, this links to finance, which was highlighted as a very important piece. Understanding your finance and investment needs, I think, is critical in order to shape your plan, understand the investment needs, and then search for that. And we hope also in the multi-governance space that national governments will be there to support and enable the flow, an easier flow and faster flow of finance. This space is definitely not there only for the local and regional governments. They need to do this together. And you heard from Stefan, working with civil society, working with businesses, industry, working with different levels of government. This is a cohesive, collaborative space that we need to create, and we need to get people excited to be in this space. And the approach ICLEI takes is to make this fun. We actually like working together and co-designing and co-constructing approaches, which would be then designed and implemented. And action, action, action is the outcome and the end result, of course. We want to know what is the progress from now until you've achieved your target. So we're calling on public reporting. That is also for the sake of transparency, to make sure that also others can see and help if you're getting stuck somewhere, if you cannot move forward. And of course, we want to show and celebrate leadership. We have heard from some of our mayors, our governors. Also, these mayors and governors not only state what is actually happening, but they're also calling for more support. And wherever you go to an event that tackles climate change at the subnational level, you will hear the constant call, we need help, we need support, we need access to finance. Next slide, please. So the global climate emergency is there. This event addresses that particular topic. So we are calling on every single subnational government, whether in an urban area, rural area, whether large or small, set a climate neutrality target, ideally declare a climate emergency because it gives you additional powers within your system, and then join our Green Climate Cities program to also benefit from the peer exchange and the opportunities that we provide. We have a clear framing. So climate neutrality requires an upscale of action. We've been supporting cities, towns, and regions around the world since the 1990s. At that stage, it was not tagged as a climate emergency. The framing now is an emergency. And from our own perspective, we have constructed our work according to 5 pathways. And each pathway brings a new lens which needs to converge with the climate lens. So you will hear more from Charis talking about our circular development work. But of course, we need to bring in biodiversity and nature-based solutions. We need to be more people-centered to help protect people, understand their needs, and also how we can bring them into the climate action plans and the actual actions as well. And of course, resilience and getting to a net zero greenhouse gas emissions is logical. Next slide. Very briefly, our definition on climate neutrality. It's important to understand that when you set such a target, you need to set a target against a baseline. You need to know what your starting point is. You need to know when, by which year you wish to achieve this, a recommended 2040 approach at the latest. But the importance is to understand what net zero actually means. And this is quite an intensive technical piece of work where we also need to build capacity and understanding on how to define and achieve net zero in your particular context. However, the other side of the coin is adaptation to climate change. We cannot just focus on mitigation. We need to look at both. And of course, in the global south, people do not like to talk about greenhouse gas emissions, but there are many greenhouse gas emissions in all parts of the world that can be avoided, reduced, and drastically moving to net zero as we switch, for example, to 100% renewable energy, looking at all your sectors, trying to get polluting emissions that also cause air pollution, getting action across the board, which would make a win-win for everybody if we reduce emissions, and looking then, of course, at resilience and adapting to climate change in the known anticipated impacts of climate change, but also future scenarios where it gets fuzzy. So the mayors and the governors are quite worried about scenarios because they're not sure. These are not facts, these are projections. And you need to take decisions now based on projections for the next 10 years, the next 20 years, where you make infrastructure decisions. This is not easy, and that's also where technical assistance and support can be provided. And the last piece of our definition is the benefits. There are so many co-benefits, but that means bringing these different lenses in and making sure we can look after the health of our people, our planet, and our place. Unpacking the approach we take to climate neutrality, our entry point is resilient development. And this was also particularly framed on the request of the Global South, that we should not just make the message around emissions reduction and avoidance, which is obvious. A resilient community includes climate change adaptation, climate change resilience, as well as climate change mitigation and switching to sustainable energy. Our support offer is framed under the Green Climate Cities program, and we bring now 3 new pillars to unpack climate neutrality, getting to net zero emissions, divesting from polluting fuels and investing into green, clean, and sustainable, and as a least interesting option, but it has to be on the table, is offsetting those emissions that you cannot immediately reduce or avoid. So how do we work? I want to give you a snapshot through, we're a project-based funded organization, so I want to show you one of our flagship projects that has just concluded as a successful approach, our Urban-Led 2 project, which you might have heard of before. We've been working with more than 70 cities in 8 countries and across the European Union. This has been funded, very generously funded by the European Union through their development aid program. And that's also why we decided to create this North-South-South engagement so that European cities can engage, share their lessons learned, but also learn. And they have indeed learned a lot from the Global South cities, but then also a lot of strong South-South collaboration. And the color coding there, if you look at, we've got the European cities in blue. It's a bit small to see probably. Our phase 1 cities, which have also been pulled into phase 2, started in Brazil, India, South Africa, and Indonesia, and we kept them and we pulled them into the phase 2, where we added Bangladesh, Laos, as well as Colombia, and goodness, now I'm forgetting my own country list here. But it's been a fabulous exercise where we've got so many different perspectives. And the bottom line that we found in this project was the problems are pretty similar. The context might be different, but the problems are similar. And that's where we brought the mayors to speak to the mayors, the technical people to the technical people, and we gave process guidance. And I will share with you very briefly how we did that. The next, so basically we applied our Green Climate Cities program. We scaled that support. We actually also tested the approach to integrated climate action. So this brings together adaptation and mitigation closer. And then we provided technical assistance. To the next slide. This is also made publicly available, a lot of our technical assistance, generic solutions that you can consider for your applying in your local context. Recommended bundles of actions, so those are our solutions packages, and backed up by case studies that illustrate how it was implemented in a particular territory. And we're looking at everything. We're looking at finance, awareness raising, how to get people on board, as well as sectoral approaches. So go and take a look. It's all online and free and in multiple languages. We translated a lot into Indonesian Bahasa and several other languages as well. This is a wonderful resource which we hope we will be able to grow over the time as well. Next slide. And then, of course, we want to know what's happening, but you also want to know what's happening. So together with CDP, through the CDP ICLEI Track platform, a global reporting platform, we're mobilizing these local governments to report publicly. They can choose not to report publicly, but to report to us that would not be publicly displayed. But we really want to see public reporting, to give confidence to the investors that there's a commitment, to give confidence to your citizens who can see all the wonderful actions and action plans that you have. That would inspire others to action as well. And this reporting piece, we've eased from this year onwards because we know there's a heavy reporting burden, but we want to show to the national governments especially what is happening in their country, what is the subnational contribution. And the same reporting system and questions can be used to report to the Global Covenant of Mayors, to the Race to Zero, to the Race to Resilience, to many ICLEI programs. So we've really made, this was a hard effort to get this piece of the puzzle right, and we're ready to roll now, and also to serve you with transparent information. Now, we're talking today about multi-level governance. In this project of Urban-Led 2, where we worked with UN Habitat, we asked the national governments, how can we support them on multi-level governance? So there was a lot of capacity building done on what does this actually mean. Now, multi-level governance, you would look at the systems, how the different tiers or layers or levels of government work together in a governmental system, whether it's coordinated, whether they are communicating with each other, and also making sure that there is reporting to each other, that the local level reports to the national level, but the national level also needs to report to the local level. What is the policy, the framework? And that space is very much an enabling space. And I think in the current system, if we look at the NDCs and the national adaptation plans, I see huge potential for upscaling on multi-level governance. This is a weakness still in many systems. And if you look at the examples that we have done through Urban-Leds, please feel free also to reach out to us. We would welcome stepping up this particular piece. That's an enabler from our perspective. If we look at the next example, a couple of pilot projects. So through the 8 million euro we received from the European Commission over the course of 5 years, we were able only to do seed projects, so small seed money for small projects, but we also were able to mobilize a massive project pipeline for infrastructure projects that are seeking massive investment. I'm zooming in on the small seed projects to show you these are messages of hope. We have worked with the local government to define what are these priority projects that could help raise awareness with the citizens and their businesses. And if you look at the snapshot in Bogor City, we very much focused also on waste management was a major issue. So we're trying to get projects that could be scaled up. And there is massive potential, again, of course, in Indonesia, waste management is a key area, which also requires a resilience lens. And we think we've learned a lot through study tours where the technical people could look at options and make the right choices for that particular context. If we go to the city, the two cities in Laos, they started from scratch. They did not have climate action plans. Now they have climate action plans, they have greenhouse gas inventories, they have climate risk and vulnerability assessments. So their baselines are clear, and now we know what to do in the next step. We help them develop their climate action plans. They have a reasonably good idea what investments are now needed, and this now needs to be implemented. So we're there talking to the national ministries, and of course, there's huge appetite there to build on our Urban Leds project and scale up. Again, these small pilot projects gave also an insight to the local governments. What can they do with their own budgets? Small money and huge potential impact that people have a better understanding how to use solar energy, how to save water, very, very practical dimension and approaches. The next slide gives you a snapshot of everything we've done in the project in a little infographic. I am extremely proud of sharing this with you. The ICLEI teams, the UN Habitat teams have worked very hard, and we have achieved fantastic results in this project. This is a model project for us, which we hope to replicate. Let's see if we can get some G7 money or wherever funding to upscale and replicate these fantastic good practice examples. Now, we have a very basic global support offer that I can quickly show to you here, where we have our Green Climate Cities program is our generic program for any local or regional government, whether you're just starting or whether you have advanced substantially. So join us, that is for free, and it's a global program where we can give you a basic level of support. Then we are requesting and calling on all to upscale, to commit to climate neutrality. This is where it becomes very technical. We deep dive, and this is not for free. There we can give some basic support to those who are just starting in the space. This is where investments need to flow and finance needs to flow to do the deep dives, to design robust climate action plans, as the city of Bonn, for example, is busy doing. And then, of course, we give technical guidance through our Solutions Gateway. We give access to finance through our project pipeline in the Transformative Actions Program. And, of course, we have our reporting platform. So we're closing the loop with the support offer we give. It is there. It is for your use. Please mobilize your own city's leadership to join us and step into the space. This is a call for action. Time is running out, people. The clock is ticking. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mareike, for this very rich and in-depth presentation, and I'm also glad that you've managed to keep your voice throughout this. And Mareike's contact is also on the slide. I'm sure there are many follow-up questions, and we likely won't have the time in this session to address all of them. So please, get in touch. But before you do, maybe you would like to listen first to adding a special lens on this, and that's really how we can collect maybe the circular economy approaches to the climate emergency and the climate action on the ground. And I'm very pleased that my colleague Karis Hoffmann is here from our circular development team, who will now give us some more insights into how that could play out. I believe you have some concrete examples as well. So Karis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here with you this afternoon. So as Leon was saying, I would like to share some reflections and examples with you on how critical actually the role of circular economy is in achieving climate neutrality. So today we know that we on average emit around 50 billion tons of CO2 equivalent each year, which is a huge sum. And our current decarbonization efforts are very crucial, but they do not sufficiently address emissions that are deeply embedded in the materials and products that are flowing within our economy. So switching to renewable energy can only cut the emissions by 55%, and the remaining 45% stem from our consumption patterns. So this includes the emissions from our homes, from cars, from food, and other products that we use, produce, and discard every day. So transforming the way we produce and consume in the urban environment can drastically contribute to reducing emissions. And circular economy actions provide great opportunities to reach local strategic goals, such as climate neutrality, regeneration of the urban natural environment, and the creation of new livelihood opportunities. And in fact, the transition to circular practices is key to achieve climate neutrality. So we see this with the city of Turku in Finland. They have recognized the critical importance of transitioning to a circular economy to achieve their ambitious goal of becoming climate neutral by 2029 already. So together with ICLEI, Turku has developed the Circular Turku Roadmap, which was adopted by the City Council last November. The roadmap takes a systemic perspective to the circular economy by applying the Circular Cities Actions framework of ICLEI to identify actions across 5 key thematic areas, which are food, construction, mobility, energy, and water. The actions framework is a set of 5 strategies and 15 concrete actions that city practitioners can implement to support the transition to a circular economy. The framework was developed with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Circular Economy and Metabolic. And the roadmap development process was particularly inclusive. So the city of Turku consulted over 200 stakeholders to identify the interventions. And each of the actions underwent a social risk assessment developed by ICLEI to ensure no social groups are adversely affected. Based on these learnings, we will release a guidebook on equitable transitions at the World Urban Forum this June, on 30th of June. So you can come join us there in Katowice. Then Turku has also contributed to Finland's recently adopted ambitious climate law, which puts the country on track to reach net zero by 2035 and achieve net negative emissions by 2040 through consultations and providing best practices. And this actually demonstrates multi-level action in practice. And then from an advocacy standpoint, ICLEI is advocating to increase the uptake of circular practices to achieve climate goals. Since 2016, together with UNEP and Global ABC, ICLEI has been the focal point of the Marrakesh Partnership Human Settlements Pathway, leading the waste and consumption area. Last year, we consulted with stakeholders to put forth actions focused around 3 key ambitions: zero waste cities, 1.5-degree living, and social equity. And this year, we will emphasize how the transition to circularity actually offers a holistic approach to achieve these ambitions across multiple sustainability areas. So as I was referring to beforehand, we need to address consumption-based emissions in our climate plans to actually reach the goals of the Paris Agreement, and circular practices are necessary to reach these last reductions in emissions by supporting the uptake of low-emission lifestyles through circular practices. And then secondly, also, waste reduction is a key priority area for us, as many local and national governments are actually still facing pressing waste management challenges. Circularity here offers a concrete pathway to reduce waste in the first place by promoting new business models and resource efficiency, and a means to manage waste streams more effectively by closing loops. And thirdly, circular practices are also offering social co-benefits, such as supporting equitable access to goods and services and creating local employment opportunities. So to close, in the next few months, we are actually expanding our platform for all things circular at ICLEI, which is the ICLEI Circulars platform. We're aiming to grow a community of practice and convening local governments that are eager to adopt circularity to address their common sustainability challenges. Circularity does not stop at city boundaries or even country boundaries. We are always looking for partners who would like to collaborate to advance the circular economy in cities. So if you're interested, please get in touch. And my remarks are a bit shorter, but I'll hand it back over to Leon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karis, for adding this very important lens. And as you pointed out, there's lots of potential in there. And now we have, I think, a very brief moment for questions while my colleague Yunus Arikan has just arrived from his other engagement, so he will prepare to give his insights. But so I'm trying to see on this platform, it seems we have questions in the room, and that's great, but I can't see any questions on the platform, but I assume there are none. But maybe the gentleman here in the first row would like to.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ivan from Costa Rica. I'm really glad to be here, and I want to share with you just a few words. First of all, I want to say thank you to the GIZ, because they helped to Costa Rica how to make a methodology to assess the risk in our infrastructure. And now we are finished our methodology, so we can share with other countries. First of all, we think that we don't have to think in hard infrastructure. We have to think in green infrastructure. We have to think in blue infrastructure. And you know, adaptation, to me, is the face of the climate change. The mitigation you can feel, you can touch, but adaptation, you can cry, you can feel, you can touch. And the local government are the face. They are the face of the climate change. We have to see the local government, and you have to help them, have to make not only the risk and the hazards, the local government are the answers, and the local government are the solutions. So we can help them. And thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? The lady here in the first row, please.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sandra Prüfer. I'm a Bonn citizen, so we are also really supporting this Bonn for Future process. I'm also engaged with Parents for Future, but also globally working with the Fossil Fuel Treaty campaign. And Bonn has also endorsed this initiative, you know, going, fossil fuel-free city, first one in Germany, and there's now 50 of them. I heard, for example, that there's Lagos also a campaign going on, so that would be a big thing. When we talk about kind of like this model cities like Turku, it would be interesting for me, to hear, especially with the COP27 being framed as an African COP. Are there some lighthouse projects or like cities in Africa? And then we've seen right now, I went to other talks about, fossil fuel expansion, especially gas in West Africa and in East Africa, Senegal, and not investing in renewables. That could become stranded assets eventually. This is also, it's developed to serve, to be exported, not bringing energy to the local people. So this was my take. How do you work with big, mega, small cities in sub-Saharan Africa? And the other question was circular economy and also GIZ. We know that there's a lot of, we basically exporting our textile. We people think they're recycled and then they export it to Kenya. We do this with our electro trash to Ghana, and then GIZ is helping to set up a system there, to do really recycling, which didn't happen. But shouldn't we just stop in the sense of circular thinking that we don't even produce this waste that then we export to global South countries? So that would be the circular question and then the energy question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. While maybe some of the panelists can think about if and which question they feel ready to answer. I just want to have a quick show of hands in the room. Is there anyone who would like at a later moment to also submit more questions? There's someone there. Yeah, and also over there. Okay. But then maybe we first make a round of answers and then we take more questions. But thank you for indicating that already. Anyone, any volunteers? So I see 2 show of hands, or 3 actually. So maybe we start with Marijke and then we move this way.
Thank you very much. I think that's exactly the kind of question where this is the way we want to see the upscale. So the way ICLEI works is, regardless of the size of the territory, we work with the local or the regional government that administers the territory and help them understand how to work with others. That's very much an approach that is embedded in our daily work, and also how they can institutionalize climate action. Now, climate action is pretty much everything. You need to look at your sectors, and you need to understand where your risks and vulnerabilities are, where your emissions come from. And then you have a basis of information for which to act. So we typically, the model that I showed you for the Urban LEDs project is the classical model we follow, that you do your assessments, that informs your climate action planning so that you can have a robust climate action plan that addresses mitigation, adaptation, and resilience at the same time. So you look at every action and you bring that lens in. The new piece is we bring in the circular economy lens as well. Fully agreed, we need to avoid waste. That's the starting point, and not just sit with causing more problems for ourselves. So it's also thinking, it's more systems thinking that we also encourage. And again, the bigger cities in the world have more capacity in-house. The staff capacity in the local governments is more robust. But we see that the secondary cities, the tertiary cities are the ones who also need a lot of support, considering they are growing very fast in the global south. The secondary city of today is tomorrow your next mega city. So we are trying also to help them think proactively, looking at projections in terms of growth of citizens, and also the socio-economic, the business opportunities, and making sure that they bring in a climate justice lens, that people are secure, that they are safe, that they have jobs, and that those people who will be losing their jobs because we're moving away from fossil fuels, that those people are incorporated into the thinking. So our approach is very broad, and it's regardless of city size. We bring that lens, but we look at the local context. So let's say there's a small town in the middle of the sub-Saharan desert, very particular geographical context, which we take into account, and then we would also typically flag to the national government, more capacity is needed, the city is vital for your economy or whatever, that we bring that vertical lens in as well to help the different levels of government understand how can they enable action at the local level. I know it's very difficult to grasp, so take a look at our website. We have fantastic snapshots there of actions that we're implementing in the Solutions Gateway, case studies. We're trying to capture the lessons learned as much as we can and share these globally. So take a look at our World Secretariat website, which is the global one, but also take a look at the regional offices where they zoom in on very particular projects and examples as well. There's a wonderful diversity of guidance and information available and at hand.
Thank you. Dr. Liz?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Also, I can echo what Mareike said. Let me give you a few examples also how to address this in a very practical way. Of course, we have to come away from the repair mode more to the precautionary approach. So, as you said, we have to avoid trash, we have to avoid emissions. This is the first obligation. And of course, then we have to see what to do with the existing waste and also how to help cities and also local governments in general to address climate issues. We have been working in the Philippines at two levels. First of all, with the Asian Development Bank, we had a cities development facility there that with GSZ support could first of all facilitate the investments in city integrated infrastructure, integrated development in a way that cities could really access finance and also implement based on feasibility studies that this facility prepared, really get into implementation. And we have learned ourselves, first of all, the mantra was we need to come from investment cycles of starting an idea up to 5 years until the finance is flowing. We need to shorten this. And we need to come up with more robust planning, with more in-depth financial cost-benefit analysis, and also in processes where cities are really in the driver's seat. So that was the first objectives, but then we discussed with the colleagues, well, this is a brilliant opportunity to bring climate aspects and resilience aspects into the city planning. So we integrated into the approach in designing these feasibility studies for bankable projects, the adaptation lands, the resilience perspective. And all of a sudden, the perspectives and the actors at the city level also have changed. So it was a more broader approach, and it was really zooming into what will be the future development of the city, what kind of risks do we expect. This means also looking into scenarios and how can we counteract. Our colleague from Costa Rica has quoted this example, a whole of government approach. Actually, in Costa Rica, we're very, very lucky to find a partner, and I think also the demand came from the partner. What can we do to increase resilience in infrastructure, not only cities, but also in harbors, in the road system? This example of Ahrtal has shown us the major bottleneck was the building of the bridges. Because the bridges were too low, there was all of a sudden a lot of debris coming down, and that blocked the flow through of water. There was all of a sudden so much water around, so that whole areas were washed away, and people lost their lives and their property, etc. It's still devastated, this area. It's absolutely a nightmare. So we have to, in a precautionary approach, bring that into city planning, have the right instruments, this PVIC aspect, so looking into technologies, and this is where GSZ can bring together actors. We have been working with the Canadian and the World Federation of Engineers, who had an instrument that we could apply there, and of course the government has picked it up and now really mainstreamed. A last example, also in terms of upscaling, in the Philippines, we have supported the National Climate Action Plan. So the National Climate Change Action Plan focused on the overall approach, policy approach, implementation approach, and finance approach, but looking into various sectors at the national level. This is, of course, quite abstract. So what we did, we supported the government. We worked together with various ministries in establishing local climate change action plans. So how to address that, what has been outlined at the national level, how to integrate that into the local framework. And we have showcased that in a few cities, typical cities, some coastal areas, some hilly areas, cities and municipalities that had a lot of natural resources issues like deforestation, etc. So really looking into bringing the ministries together. And the important thing I've learned, in a country where the city or the municipality has the power to plan for their area, but most of the area which is classified uplands is under the Environment Ministry, so completely different ministry and also other structures at the local level. So first of all, you had to bring together actors that had the power to change, that had the power to plan. And so we really moved forward as a frame condition that these two spatial planning systems went together. So for the natural resources, for the forest and upland area, and for the city itself, because upstream, downstream, we had this ridge to reef approach, made it very obvious that you can only plan as a whole. So this is something that we provided resources, but then it was picked up at the local level and it was integrated into the approach of planning with the National Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board as the overall supervising body issuing regulations for land use planning. So these are the practicalities that we have to work with local government units, and only then with integrated approaches, but with kind of effort, things can be picked up and then building capacities that cities and actors can implement themselves.
Thank you very much. Very interesting insight. And Karis, if you would like to add.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question also from me. I wanted to touch on your point regarding circular economy and the waste exports. So indeed, as you were saying, we need to design for circularity at the product level, but we also need to kind of design for cities to become resource efficient, to understand where there is maybe space that is not really used appropriately in the city, where it can be scaled up and used for different uses as well. So also regarding the banning of waste exports, it's not always so easy to just ban waste exports, because we see that in cities like Accra and Ghana, for example, they have a big market that is focused on e-waste and reusing the e-waste and making new products out of that. So if we would just ban all of the waste exports, we would also kind of introduce new vulnerabilities in local economies. So we need to make sure that local economies are actually diversified and they are using different inputs into their economies and safeguarding the people there as well. And then we at ICLEI, we support cities in diversifying their economies and understanding where the priority sectors are to actually introduce more circular practices. So we work with cities along the whole value chain, from taking materials to making products to creating waste, with the goal of actually minimizing or abolishing waste. And we do this with the Circular Cities Actions Framework that I was mentioning earlier. So this is a framework that has 5 key strategies, from rethink to regenerate to reduce, reuse, and recover. And all of these 5 strategies, they have sub-strategies that are referring to cities. Basically, every action point that cities can implement, we have strategies that they can implement there. So I really recommend you to look up our platform called ICLEI Circulars. This is where we gather all of the circular development work that we're doing at ICLEI. So there you can see the different approaches that we're taking, the different roadmaps that cities have adopted, and also the different projects that we have at ICLEI on circular economy, and read best practices from different cities as well. We have a few events that we've done in previous time that are focused on specific priority sectors. So right now we have a webinar series focused on cities in action, on different priority sectors for cities, which gathers different cities from different world regions that are actually implementing actions on the ground. On food, for example, we have a webinar coming up on the 23rd of June on circular food and agriculture. So this is also something that you can then check out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karis. And I think we've learned already from this session that websites from all our institutions are very great resources for further information. And I'm sure after the session, if you have particular questions about particular websites, you feel free to approach us and we're happy to guide them for you. We're a bit short on time. I know we have 2 more questions in the room. I would like to ask you to be very brief in your questions if possible. And in case we don't get to answer them, I'm sure some of our experts might be willing to stick around for another 5 minutes after the close of the session to answer your questions. The gentleman over there already has the microphone in hand, so maybe we can just proceed with you.
Thank you very much. My name is David Kay. I'm actually here with a Mediators Beyond Borders International badge, so I'm very interested in some of the citizen participation issues that came up. and I'm also involved in my local and state climate policy issues. But as a researcher at a university, what my brief question is, what would you say would the research priorities be on circular economy that academia could contribute to in the context of what I perceive to be many unanswered questions about what we need to do and how to proceed while policy is actually being made today?
Thank you. I think there's a gentleman over there in the back that also had a question.
Hello, I'm Jonas, and I actually work in the education field. So I was curious with the multi-level approach, to what extent we're not only looking at infrastructure, but also a little bit relating to this civil engagement, and to what extent when we look at cities, obviously they're a collection of people that is the cities are much closer to the people than, let's say, like a state or like a national governance. So to what extent can we put education in place to actually involve the local communities in these projects, especially when it's kind of this grassroots approach where we have smaller projects and we want to inspire people to go beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone among the panelists who would like to have a 1-minute response, if possible? Ms. Dr. Liss.
Well, 1 minute is a challenge because the questions really could zoom us into research necessities. But I'd like to answer Jonas' question. Of course, the integrated approach to have local actors getting together, this participatory approach where you are also working on from the scientific field is very important because you need the buy-in. And then communication, education is also one important factor. In all our projects, especially those financed by the ICLEI, we have a communication component, awareness-raising component. And the other thing is the incentive. What to do that actors buy in. It's not the workshop, but it's the joint action. And I could see a lot of motivation once people have been participating and also being enabled, empowered to shape their own future. And in the end, I've mentioned these local climate change action plans. With these action plans that had a certain framework and standards for implementation, once they had it, they could access national budgets. So it was a huge incentive for the actors to really design that plan together, common consensus how to implement it, and then the government budget could be accessed and implementation facilitated. So you have to combine each and everything, and I think this is also maybe a question for research. What are the best approaches? So you have to do some lessons learning, but also some communication theories and how to motivate people towards a change.
Thank you very much, also for the brevity. We also have now a very short comment from the city of Bonn. You might remember Mr. Wagner was here, but his colleague is here, can answer one of the questions also.
I hope this works. My name is Susanne Nolden. I work with the International Affairs and Global Sustainability Office of Bonn. And I would like to answer to Jonas's question on education, which is of the essence when you really want to make progress in all areas of sustainability. You have to have 3 pillars of education, and the ACE initiative under the UNFCCC has highlighted that 1,000 times. You have to get to schools, start at early age, like we do in Bonn with the Bonn Climate Ambassadors Program and the Bonnie and Bo Climate Driver's License. We work with 3rd graders with a foundation. Comic books, having the emblem lion Bonnie meet the polar bear Bo, who had to emigrate from the North Pole because the ice is melting. Bonnie is quite naive. He doesn't know about sustainability. Bo is teaching him, and they're teaching the children who are teaching their families and reaching out. 2nd pillar is teaching those who have to work sustainably. We choose the informal brown bag lunches to convey sustainability topics to our own administration, within the administration. So several departments who make changes and transformation towards sustainability introduce their work to other colleagues in a brown bag lunch. Very simple, very effective, because people take something away. Third pillar, the biggest one actually, is all the voluntary informal education, be it at the Center for Adult Learning on a regular basis, at the House of Nature Education Center, or very informally in the Bonn SDG days, where we pick up on every topic which is emerging and important and which should be spread broadly into the citizenship. And I think the question from a couple of minutes ago, Sandra, thank you for asking about textile, how we shop clothes and how we do. That the whole lot of organizations who have lots of expertise here in Bonn, like FemNet, an organization who's dealing with fair working conditions for women in developing countries and who's our annual partner for the year. And they're just issuing a fair and sustainable shopping guide for the next issue. Teaching people and really informing them, alerting them of the option they have to perhaps buy pre-loved goods, to perhaps buy sustainably produced. So I think learning is the most important thing, and this is why Bonn became a UNESCO learning city as well. So just to give one example locally, and there's lots of potential to get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanne. And last comment from the panelist, Mareike.
Thank you very much. David, just to respond to your particular question, so ICLEI has a global research strategy. Do please take a look online, but one of the things that I can point you to would be the recently launched Global Research Action Agenda, which is a consolidated effort of researchers around the world working with local governments as well. This was launched at our research symposium held in May in Malmö, and this is available online. That's a good starting point, but we'd love to hear from you what could feed into the research of the next generation, because we also need to go into listen mode and understand what topics are necessary to move from where we are now into the cutting edge space that is needed. And it's not only about technology, it's also about education, different ways of working, the systems change approach. So there's a lot that needs research where researchers can inform decision making and action.
Thank you very much. And now we move to the final segment of this session, also being a bit mindful of the time, which is of course I think this man needs little introduction. Is Yunus Arikan, the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLEI, but also the focal point of the LGMA constituency. So he's really doing and pushing everywhere in all channels the work of the LGMA, and he's then therefore ideally placed to take our mind from SB 56, because it's final week of SB 56, towards COP27 in Sharm, and see how we can kind of condense everything we've learned here from these examples and bring that onto the COP agenda. So Yunus, the floor is yours.
And being aware of the time, just 1 minute, I could maybe ask their flexibility for that. So we had said that in Glasgow, time for multi-level action has come. So we have a reference for multi-level and cooperative action in the Glasgow Climate Pact. It's now time to deliver this. And Glasgow work will be continued in Sharm el-Sheikh in the sense that we would like to see this holistic approach, in the sense that local, regional, subnational, national governments could collaborate together. In that sense, the first thing is to make sure their NDCs are strengthened. We already have seen a better ambition over the past years with the engagement of local energy governments. We could make it much better and much more spread. The experience from Japan to Dominican Republic, from US to Rwanda, actually gives us a chance that we could go to further, and that's why it has to be in the climate emergency mode, so that it is much more encompassing from food to culture. That could be done with local governments. But more importantly, we say that it is time to really bring climate community, urbanization community, as Dr. Liz has mentioned, many of the investments done by ministers of public housing is not necessarily followed by ministers of environment, or vice versa. So it's not just this issue of us versus them. The whole of government approach needs other government ministers. And here, the one minister that was missing for a long time was the urbanization ministerial. Good news, we have been asking for this for a long time, and the UN Habitat Executive Board finally agreed to call for such an action. So now it is also already official on the table. The presidency, Egypt, is very seriously considering this. They already have made huge progress because they hosted World Cities Day, they will host World Urban Forum, and with the G7 wave of pressure and really opening the doors for collective approach, I think we will be going to Sharm el-Sheikh with really a game-changer agenda that the second phase of the Paris Agreement will be different because it will be multi-level and it will be starting in 6 months, but we have to first finish this session and we have to leave this room, which our colleagues are signaling us. But you can continue our communications on the LGMA process, our webinars and mailing lists, and we will continue to keep in touch, especially with Global Stocktake and other processes as well.
Thank you, Yunus. And yeah, with that, I think we can wrap up the session. I think we've had a very rich journey from local level to national government level and back. And we've have a rich bag of insights that we take home and take to Sharm. So please follow everyone's activities online, especially also the webinars, if you're interested in seeing how this constituency prepares for COP. And of course, we hope to be able to welcome you also at the Multi-Level Action Pavilion in Sharm in November. So thank you very much for your attendance and have a good continuation of your day.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was a bit clashing with the SB agenda, but I'm so happy that I think that the debate was